Why is there hazardous material in the refrigerator? Human glazing, HFY, sci-fi short story. Captain Aileron Hiss had never understood humans. In fact, the entire union of extragalactic species, UES, had never quite figured them out. As a member of the Etholith race, Aileron's people prided themselves on their vast intellect, their unshakable discipline, and their careful, calculated approach to problem-solving. Humans, on the other hand, were chaotic. They thrived in disorder. They were impulsive, emotional, and entirely unpredictable. That was why the Etholith had gone to the effort of studying humans so thoroughly. They wanted to understand their strange methods, their erratic behavior, and yet, every time they thought they had unraveled a mystery about humankind, another question popped up, leaving them further baffled. This latest situation, however, had taken even the most seasoned experts by surprise. Aileron stood in the kitchen of the human vessel Solaris, staring at the contents of the refrigerator. His mandibles twitched in confusion as he scrutinized a small, unmarked container sitting in the middle shelf. It was glowing. Not in a pleasant, soft illumination, like some of the more aesthetic technologies the Etholith had encountered. No, this glow was violent, a pulsating, toxic green that made Aileron's exoskeleton shiver in dismay. Captain Hiss, is there a problem? Asked Lieutenant Grilk, his ever-efficient second-in-command, who had accompanied him to observe human customs. Aileron flicked one of his antennae, still staring at the container. He had been trained in many things, from diplomacy to strategic warfare, but hazardous materials were not part of the curriculum. Why, is there hazardous material in the refrigerator? He asked, more to himself than to Grilk. Grilk, however, had an answer, or at least, a theory. It's possible that this is some kind of food? Aileron's mandibles clicked in disbelief. Food? It glows. It's dangerous. That's what we thought too, Grilk replied, but humans tend to eat unusual things. Aileron turned his gaze to a nearby human standing at the counter, preparing what could only be described as an abomination of textures and smells. The human, a young female named Lena, was whistling as she chopped at what appeared to be a mass of pulsing, translucent matter. The only thing it resembled was something Aileron's people used as a coolant for their ships, but the smell was entirely different, a pungent mixture of sweet and acrid. Aileron took a deep breath. You do realize this? Food could kill us, right? Lena glanced over, her eyes sparkling with mischief. Oh, it's harmless, Captain, just a bit of human glazing. She smiled and held up a spoonful of the glowing substance, offering it to him. Glazing? Aileron repeated, his voice thick with suspicion. Yeah, it's a cooking technique we humans invented to preserve things. It's not poisonous, but it can be dangerous if you don't know how to handle it. You see, we coat the food in this special substance, and it gives it a sweet, smoky flavor. But, she looked over at the refrigerator with a knowing smirk. It's not for the faint of heart. Aileron's two eyes narrowed. That still doesn't explain why it glows. Well, Lena said, as if the answer was obvious. It's a byproduct of the process. The ingredient we use, some call it glowing fungus, it's a little unpredictable, but it's a delicacy in certain human cultures. Grilk, who had been quietly watching the exchange, stepped forward and muttered something under his breath that Aileron could just barely hear. Typical humans. Aileron turned back to Lena, his confusion turning into a strange mix of frustration and awe. You, humans deliberately consume something dangerous for pleasure? Lena shrugged, taking a bite of the glowing food with no visible ill effects. Yeah, you could say we thrive on unpredictability. If we didn't try new things, how would we ever evolve, right? At that moment, Aileron understood. He understood in the most disturbing way possible. Humans didn't need to calculate every step. They didn't need to plan every move with precision. Their evolutionary advantage, their strength, was their willingness to take risks, to embrace chaos and unpredictability. They survived the unknown by defying it. This human glazing, Aileron said slowly, his mind racing. It's not about the food, is it? Lena paused mid-chew, blinking at him. What do you mean? Humans, you are not just surviving the hazardous. You are mastering it. The chaos, the danger, the unpredictability. You thrive on it. Lena's eyes widened in realization, and then she grinned. Exactly. That's how we got this far, how we'll keep going. She wiped her mouth, then leaned forward with a conspiratorial gleam in her eye. Wanna try some? Alaron recoiled instinctively. No matter how much he wanted to understand humans, this was one line he was not prepared to cross. I think I'll pass on the glowing fungus for now. Lena laughed. Your loss. It's one of the best parts of being human. Alaron sighed, letting his exoskeleton sag in a rare display of weariness. For all his understanding of tactics and war, this was one puzzle he wasn't sure he could solve. But one thing was certain, humans were an enigma wrapped in a chaotic, glowing package, and somehow, they would always find a way to thrive. Grilk, Alaron said, his voice thoughtful. Perhaps we should start studying their ability to adapt, after all. It seems to be their greatest weapon. Grilk nodded slowly. I believe you're right, Captain. Humans, they are unpredictable. Indeed, Alaron replied, his voice quieter now. And that, Lieutenant, is what makes them dangerous. And so, with a mind full of new questions and uncertainties, Captain Alaron Hiss left the human kitchen, still unsure whether they had unlocked a secret of evolution, or simply found a new way to embrace madness. Either way, he would need a lot more data before he could truly understand humanity. And for now, that was probably for the best. As Captain Alaron Hiss made his way down the corridors of the Solaris, his mind continued to spin. The more he pondered the human's penchant for risk and chaos, the more he found it both baffling and, in some strange way, fascinating. He had seen entire civilizations collapse under the weight of their own unpredictability. But humans? They not only survived chaos, they thrived in it. They seemed to be constantly testing their limits, pushing boundaries, and constantly bouncing back from the most improbable scenarios. It was maddening. Lieutenant Grilk, as always, remained the voice of reason, his expression as stoic as ever. But even he had to admit that the unpredictability of humans was beginning to get under his exoskeletal skin. Captain, Grilk began, after a few moments of silence, I am still struggling to understand this. If they can make something like glowing fungus a part of their culture, how do we even approach diplomacy with them? They seem so unpredictable? Alaron finished for him. Yes, I know. He paused and thought for a moment. But that's their strength. It's as if they've found a way to adapt by rejecting the very thing that other species hold dear: stability, control, and predictability. They don't fear the unknown. They embrace it. Grilk's mandibles twitched in confusion. You mean they choose to live in disorder? Not disorder, Grilk, Alaron replied, his voice reflective. Freedom. They thrive in it. The chaos doesn't control them. They control the chaos. Grilk seemed to mull this over, his antennae flicking thoughtfully. That's a dangerous philosophy, Captain. I agree, Alaron replied, but it is one that has led them to dominate nearly every corner of the galaxy they inhabit. We, the Etholith, have always prided ourselves on our structure and strategy. But what if we've missed something? What if their lack of structure is their strategy? They reached the observation deck, and Alaron stepped forward, gazing out at the swirling mass of stars. It was a beautiful sight, as always, but today, it felt almost suffocating to him. The predictable beauty of the cosmos in sharp contrast to the chaos he'd just encountered in the human kitchen. There's a potential here, Grilk, Alaron said quietly. A potential we cannot ignore. Humans, they could be the key to our future. Grilk raised an eyebrow, clearly perplexed. The key to what? To survival. Grilk was about to speak when the comms console beeped, interrupting the moment. Captain Hiss, Lieutenant Grilk, came the voice of Lieutenant Lena, the human who had introduced Alaron to the concept of glazing and chaos. We need to talk. There's something you should see. Alaron exchanged a quick glance with Grilk. The lieutenant's expression was unreadable, but Alaron sensed the tension in his second-in-command stance. Both of them followed the command to the communications bay, where Lena stood waiting, a large display screen before her. I've been reviewing some data, Lena began, her voice unusually serious. I think you'll find this interesting. On the screen appeared a complex web of interstellar activity, a map of the galaxy, one Alaron was familiar with. But there was something different about it now. Red markers blinked in places they hadn't been before, areas of unusual activity. What is this? Alaron asked, his voice hardening with suspicion. Lena met his gaze with a smile that held no warmth. It's what humans call a threat map. We've identified several unregistered ships traveling through this region, unmarked and without clearance. They're avoiding all contact with our military fleets and commerce routes. Alaron leaned in, eyes narrowing as he scanned the screen. The red markers flickered again. Pirates? Not just pirates, Lena replied. This is something much bigger. These ships are organized. They're building something, and we think they're going to strike soon. Grilk stepped closer, his voice low. How does this involve us? We aren't in any immediate danger. Lena shook her head. That's not the point. The point is, this could be our chance to work together. Your etholith technology combined with our human unpredictability. If we act swiftly and without hesitation, we can stop them before they strike. Alaron stared at Lena, understanding now what she was proposing. You want us to adapt to your chaos. You think we can survive and fight their unpredictability with our own. Lena nodded. Exactly. You've got the strategy, and we've got the courage to take risks. Together, we'll be unstoppable. The room fell silent, the weight of the proposal hanging in the air. Alaron's mind raced. It was a dangerous proposition. Etholith war tactics relied on meticulous planning, well-organized strategies. Humans, however, thrived on chaos, and the more Alaron thought about it, the more he saw it as the perfect countermeasure. The unpredictable nature of humanity might just be the key to stopping a threat that no amount of careful preparation could predict. He glanced at Grilk, whose eyes reflected the same uncertainty, but Alaron's gaze drifted back to Lena, and for the first time in his life, he wasn't looking at the human with disdain or confusion. He was seeing the power in her unpredictability, the very thing that could save them all. If we do this, Alaron said finally, his voice steady but filled with a newfound resolve, we do it on our terms. Etholith precision, human adaptability. If we fail together. But if we succeed, we might just change the future. Lena's grin widened. Deal. And so, in that moment, Captain Alaron Hiss of the Etholith came to understand humanity in a way he never had before. They weren't simply an unpredictable species. They were a force of nature, a wild card in the deck of the galaxy's power players, and as chaotic and reckless as they might seem, it was their very unpredictability that made them the most dangerous and the most valuable. The Solaris turned its course toward the unknown threat, with Alaron at the helm, ready to navigate the storm ahead. This would be a fight unlike any they had fought before, and for the first time, Alaron wasn't just observing humanity from a distance, he was about to be part of their revolution. As the Solaris hurtled toward the unknown threat, Alaron felt a peculiar sense of anticipation that he hadn't experienced in years. He, the captain of the Etholith forces, who had once placed his faith in calculated moves and strategic precision, was now at the helm of an operation where uncertainty was not only accepted, it was encouraged. The team of Etholith soldiers and human crew members had been gathered in the ship's command center. The mix of species in the room was a reminder of just how unusual this alliance was. The humans were brimming with excitement, confident in their approach, while the Etholith remained stoic, their instincts to plan every detail being overridden by the sheer force of human energy. Lena stood beside Alaron, her eyes glued to the data feed scrolling across the holographic display. Captain, we've pinpointed the exact location of their ships, she said, her voice calm yet charged with the electric tension of impending action. Alaron's eyes swept over the map. It showed an isolated region of space, far from the typical trade routes. The red blips clustered there were too many to ignore. You were right to call this a threat. We've never seen anything like this before. I told you, Lena grinned, unshaken. Humans have a knack for finding trouble. Alaron turned to her, his expression a mix of curiosity and a rare understanding, and embracing it. I never thought I'd say this, but your chaos might be the solution to this. Lena laughed softly. It's funny how often people think chaos is a problem. Sometimes, it's the best tool in the toolbox. Before Alaron could respond, Grilk spoke from his post, his voice unusually tense. Captain, the enemy fleet has shifted position. They've detected us. Alaron's mandibles clenched. He'd expected this. The pirates, or whatever they were, wouldn't be caught off guard for long. Prepare for evasive maneuvers. Lieutenant Grilk, all Etholith personnel, be on standby. Lena's eyes sparked. Actually, Captain, let me take the lead on this one. Humans don't fight like you. You rely on precision. But what if we mixed it up? What if we confuse them? Make them second-guess every move? Alaron raised a brow. By doing what? Lena grinned again. Stepping forward to the command console, she tapped a series of buttons, pulling up a series of images, scattered debris, random ship trajectories, and erratic data feeds. We'll simulate several fake trajectories for them to follow. We'll create the illusion of a large fleet, one that's moving in all directions. Like a swarm, they'll be so busy chasing false signals, they won't know which way to turn. Alaron thought for a moment. The idea was bold, recklessly so, but in his gut, he could sense the truth in her words. A series of unpredictable moves. So they'll be forced into reaction, not calculation. Exactly, Lena said, eyes gleaming with that same wild energy that had baffled him from the start. They won't know what hit them. Alaron turned to Grilk. Prepare the fleet for deception. Follow the human plan, but maintain structural integrity in case we need to adapt. Grilk nodded, though his antennae twitched with uncertainty. Understood, Captain. As the operation unfolded, the Solaris became a blur of calculated chaos. Lena's human unpredictability guided their every move. The fake trajectories were deployed with expert precision, but the sheer randomness of their execution threw the enemy into disarray. The Etholith might have designed the framework, but it was human ingenuity and instinct that filled in the unpredictable gaps. Every maneuver was a calculated gamble, one that paid off in ways Alaron had never imagined. The enemy fleet was thrown into chaos. Ships began firing at nothing, chasing after ghost signals that didn't exist. The pirates' organized force began to splinter as they tried, and failed, to catch up with the elusive Solaris. Alaron had seen such confusion before, but never with such a deliberate, calculated lack of order. The pirates grew desperate. The Solaris zigzagged across the void, an erratic, elusive target, and Alaron knew they were winning. For every move the pirates made, there was an unexpected counter. It was like a game of interstellar chess, but played with no rules, just pure human instinct. Eventually, the remaining enemy ships began to break off, retreating in disarray. The chaotic, unpredictable force of human tactics had overwhelmed them. As the final pirate ship vanished into the distance, Alaron stood silently, processing what had just happened. He glanced over at Lena, who stood at the console, a wide grin on her face. Captain, she said, how did we do? Alaron took a long moment before replying, his voice softer than usual. We've won, thanks to you. Lena chuckled. Well, you helped, too. It was a team effort, but I think you're starting to see the value of unpredictability, aren't you? Alaron's gaze swept over the room. The Etholith officers, who had been so rigid in their expectations of a clean, orderly victory, were now watching Lena with a new respect. Grilk, too, had a small, thoughtful look on his face. He nodded slowly. I do, and I'll admit, I didn't expect that. You humans truly do thrive in chaos. Lena stepped back from the console, hands on her hips. It's all about adapting. Captain, you can't control everything. Sometimes, you just have to let go and trust that you'll find your way. We adapt, we survive, and we thrive. That's the human way. Alaron stood in silence, his mind grappling with the enormity of what they had just done. He had always believed that in order to win, one needed to control the battlefield, to predict the opponent's moves before they made them. But the human method was different, perhaps more dangerous, but also more effective than he had ever imagined. Perhaps, Alaron said quietly, we've been too focused on control. Maybe, just maybe, it's time for the Etholith to learn from humanity's way of thinking. Lena gave a quick, playful salute. Glad to have you on board, Captain. As the Solaris sailed through the stars, Alaron couldn't help but feel that, for the first time, he was beginning to understand humans. Their strength wasn't just in their adaptability, it was in their willingness to embrace the unknown, to make their own fate rather than follow a prescribed path. And in this vast, unpredictable galaxy, maybe that was exactly the advantage they needed. The Solaris was no longer just a symbol of Etholith might. Now, it was the perfect blend of strategy and chaos, a new kind of force, one that could bend the stars themselves. As the Solaris cruised through the vast expanse of space, Its crew settled into an uneasy but triumphant calm. The pirates were in retreat, and the chaos-driven strategy had worked beyond anyone's expectations. Yet, for Captain Alaron Hiss, the victory left a gnawing curiosity in his mind. There was something about the way humans adapted to the unexpected that kept him thinking, an intricate dance between intuition and reckless abandon that made them both terrifying and awe-inspiring. His thoughts were interrupted by Grilk's voice over the comms, cool and direct as ever. "Captain, we have a situation." Alaron snapped to attention. "What's happened, Lieutenant?" "The enemy fleet, it's not gone. We've intercepted a transmission from a secondary command ship. It seems their retreat was a strategic deception. They're gathering at a rendezvous point, preparing for another assault." Alaron's mandibles clicked sharply, a rare display of frustration. "They were using us as bait." Lena's voice echoed from behind him, calm and knowing. "That's a classic human move. You make the enemy think they've won, then strike when they least expect it." Alaron turned to face her. "And we've fallen right into their trap." Lena smiled, but there was no humor in her expression. "We might have, but we can turn the tables. We know what they're going to do. The element of surprise is on our side." He studied her, the woman who had, in mere hours, turned his entire understanding of warfare upside down. "How would you suggest we proceed?" Lena tapped a few commands on the console, and the map of the galaxy lit up once again. This time, she highlighted the rendezvous point, an isolated nebula, where the pirates had clearly chosen to regroup. "If they think we're going to chase them down directly, we're playing into their hand. Instead, we do the opposite. We disappear. Let them think we're weak, retreating, disorganized. Once they're comfortable, we'll hit them with everything we've got." Alaron studied the data. She was right. The pirates would never expect a counterattack if they believed the Solaris was fleeing. The idea itself was reckless, utterly human, but there was something about it that appealed to him. For the first time, he felt the pull of embracing the unknown, the chaos. He glanced at Grilk, whose expression was unreadable, as always. "We'll follow your plan, Lena," Alaron said, his voice firm, "but we do it on our terms. We'll use the Ethelitha's tactical advantage in deception, no human foolishness, only calculated risk." Lena nodded, satisfied. "That's the spirit." The ship was soon underway, slipping into the dark reaches of space, far from the pirate rendezvous point. 4 hours. The Solaris remained in stealth mode, its engines powered down, drifting silently through the nebula's dense gas clouds. The pirates, assuming they had been outwitted, would continue to gather their forces, growing complacent in their false sense of victory. Alaron could feel the weight of the decision, the thin thread of fate upon which their strategy hung. He had trusted Lena's instincts, but this would be a gamble unlike any he had taken before. He could sense the tension in the crew, the uncertainty that hung in the air like a storm cloud ready to burst. As the final moments ticked down, Alaron stood alone on the bridge, staring out into the stars. There was no turning back now. "Captain," Grilk's voice broke through the quiet, "the enemy fleet is in position. They're about to launch their assault. Do we move forward with the counterstrike?" Alaron's gaze never left the view of the nebula. The light from distant stars flickered and danced across the gas clouds. The pirates were ready, but so was he. "We strike now. Initiate the counteroffensive." Lena, who had been standing quietly beside him, let out a breath. "This is it." With a single command, Alaron's voice steady and unwavering, the Solaris sprang into action. The engines roared to life, and the ship surged forward with deadly precision. It was not a direct charge. Instead, the Solaris darted through the nebula, using its advanced cloaking systems to remain unseen as it made its way behind the pirates' vulnerable rear flank. Alaron's heart pounded in his chest, the chaos of the strategy fueling him. The time for calculated moves had passed. Now, it was time to adapt, to act quickly, unpredictably. The pirates never saw it coming. Within moments, the Solaris appeared, seemingly out of nowhere, flanking the pirate command ship from behind. Weapons flared, and the first strike hit the pirate flagship with devastating force. But it didn't stop there. A series of simultaneous attacks, diverse, erratic, unpredictable, pounded the pirate fleet from every angle. The pirates scrambled, disoriented, as they tried to regroup, but their disarray was their undoing. Lena's chaotic plan had worked perfectly. The pirates had been outwitted, outmaneuvered by the very unpredictability they had relied upon. Alaron couldn't help but marvel at the audacity of it all. "Captain, they're retreating," Grilk reported, a note of astonishment in his voice. "We've destroyed their command vessel and disabled their fleet's propulsion. They're broken." Alaron let out a long, slow breath, feeling the weight of the battle lift. It was done. The threat had been neutralized. He turned to Lena, who was watching the monitors with a satisfied smile. "Well, Captain," she said, "seems like we make a good team after all." Alaron's mandibles twitched in what might have been the closest thing to a smile he'd ever shown. "You were right, Lena. There is strength in chaos. I think we've just witnessed it." She chuckled, stepping back from the console. "I told you, human ingenuity and adaptability. No one can predict what we'll do next." The crew was already celebrating in their own way. The Ethelith officers exchanged quiet nods of approval, the admiration for their human counterparts palpable. For the first time, Alaron could see the value of that unpredictable spirit. It was a weapon in its own right, one that complemented, even enhanced, the Ethelith's structured might. "Let's head back to the nearest station," Alaron said, his voice resolute. "This victory is ours, but it's just the beginning. We've seen what humans can do. Now, we need to see how far we can take this alliance." Lena raised an eyebrow, her grin widening. "Careful, Captain. You might just find you're starting to like chaos." Alaron couldn't deny the thrill of it, the strange rush that came with breaking free from the confines of predictability. Perhaps Lena was right. Perhaps the future would be a little less structured, a little more chaotic. But for the first time in his life, Alaron felt ready to face it. With the pirates defeated and the unpredictable yet brilliant collaboration with humans in full swing, the Solaris set its course toward the unknown, an alliance that was stronger than ever, ready to meet whatever chaos the galaxy had to offer. As the Solaris drifted toward the nearest station, the mood aboard the ship was a mixture of celebration and contemplation. Alaron stood at the helm, gazing out at the stars as they sped past. The victory had been hard-earned, but in the aftermath, something about the entire mission felt different. The chaotic, unpredictable nature of their strategy had worked, but it had also revealed something deeper, a new way of thinking, one that transcended the Ethelith way of order and structure. Lena joined him at the bridge, her usual easy grin replaced by a thoughtful expression. "What's on your mind, Captain?" Alaron didn't immediately answer. He watched the stars flicker and dance across the vast blackness of space, feeling the weight of the decision he had made. It had been a gamble, a leap into the unknown, and it had paid off. But even as he recognized the victory, he could sense that this was just the beginning of something far greater. "I'm beginning to understand," Alaron said slowly, turning to face her. "The Ethelith have always relied on predictability and control. It's how we've survived, how we've thrived in this galaxy. But what if that's no longer enough? What if the future doesn't belong to those who can control the stars, but to those who can navigate them unpredictably, boldly, without fear of the unknown?" Lena studied him, her eyes searching, then nodded slowly. "I think I get it. You're starting to see the value of us, humanity, not just in the chaos, but in how we adapt to it." Alaron let out a quiet hum of agreement. "I think I am." The thought settled in his mind like a stone dropping into a vast pool of possibility. For centuries, the Ethelith had built their civilization on the premise that the universe could be bent to their will, and they had succeeded. But in their pursuit of control, they had never fully embraced the idea that not everything needed to be controlled, that sometimes, the best way to win was to let go. Grilk's voice came over the comms, breaking the silence. "Captain, we are nearing the station. The crew is requesting a debriefing. Shall we proceed?" Alaron straightened. "Yes, let's prepare." At the station, a modest facility orbiting a barren planet, Alaron and Lena met with the remaining members of their fleet, both Ethelith and human. The station's officers were waiting to hear the full report of the battle, and Alaron knew they would be curious about the unconventional tactics that had led to the pirates' defeat. As the meeting began, Alaron took a deep breath. The eyes of his crew, his Ethelith soldiers, were on him, expectant. They had witnessed the chaos that had brought them victory, but now they would want answers, and he would give them answers, though they would be unlike anything they had ever heard before. Officers, soldiers, Alaron began, his voice steady. We've just experienced a victory, but it was not a victory won by conventional means. It was a victory won by embracing the unpredictable, the human way. He paused, letting the words settle. He could see the skepticism in the eyes of his officers, the quiet discomfort that came with challenging everything they had been taught. I know this may be difficult to understand, Alaron continued, but we have just witnessed something that our kind has never fully embraced, the power of chaos, the power of adaptation. The humans have shown us a way of thinking that we have overlooked for too long. They taught us that in this universe, predictability alone is not enough. We must learn to adapt, to make quick decisions without hesitation. It is not enough to control the stars, we must learn to navigate them in ways our enemies cannot anticipate. Lena stepped forward, her voice cutting through the air with the confidence of someone who had lived through the chaos she preached. Exactly. Humanity has a knack for becoming whatever the situation demands. No strategy is too rigid. No path is too straight. We don't rely on perfection, we rely on flexibility. In the face of uncertainty, we find opportunity. Alaron looked around the room at his officers. Their expressions were mixed, some bewildered, others intrigued, but all were listening. For the first time, Alaron sensed a shift. He wasn't just commanding a fleet of soldiers anymore, he was leading them into a new era of warfare. And, perhaps, a new way of living. I see now. One of the senior officers, a grizzled Ethelith general, spoke up. You're saying that we need to let go of our need for control, that in order to defeat our enemies, we must become unpredictable? Alaron nodded, a deep sense of understanding beginning to settle within him. Yes, we must become what they cannot predict. We must embrace the chaos and bend it to our will, not with rigid plans, but with swift, decisive action. Lena added, her tone laced with a touch of humor. It's all about thinking on your feet. The minute you think you have everything figured out, the universe will throw a curveball. You've got to roll with it. Alaron watched as the room fell into silence, the weight of their words sinking in. It was clear the idea was taking hold. Some Ethelith soldiers were nodding, their minds racing with the implications of this new way of thinking. Others, however, still seemed unsure, clinging to their old methods, unwilling to let go of the comfort of control. Let's not get ahead of ourselves, Alaron said, his voice grounding the room. This is just the beginning. We've learned something today, something invaluable. But this is not the end of the journey. We must take what we've learned and refine it, adapt it to our strengths, and build something even more powerful. Lena grinned. We'll make a perfect team, Captain. The unpredictability of humanity, with the precision of Ethelith tactics, will be unstoppable. Alaron's mandibles clicked thoughtfully. We will see, Lieutenant, we will see. As the meeting concluded, Alaron felt a sense of quiet resolve settle within him. The Solaris had won this battle through chaos, through an unpredictable dance of risk and reward. But in the larger scope of things, Alaron knew that this was only the first step in a much greater journey. For the first time, he was ready to embrace the unknown. As the Solaris prepared to leave the station, the crew moved in synchrony, an unspoken understanding passing between them. It was no longer just an Ethelith ship with human advisors. It was something entirely new, a fusion of strategy and unpredictability, a force that had no equal. As they entered the depths of space once more, Alaron took his place at the helm, watching the stars ahead. The galaxy was vast, filled with threats and opportunities alike. The Ethelith had always believed they could bend the stars to their will. Now, they were learning that perhaps the key to true power was not bending the stars, but navigating them, in ways no one could predict. And with that thought, Alaron steeled himself for the journey ahead, knowing that, together with humanity, they would face whatever challenges the universe had in store. As the Solaris entered the deep reaches of space, the crew prepared for their next mission with a sense of quiet anticipation. The shadow of the enemy that had recently surfaced, a faction known as the Obsidian Collective, loomed larger now. Its fleet a dark and menacing force capable of devastating entire star systems with the flick of a switch. Their technology, stolen from an ancient civilization, was rumored to disable the most advanced ships with electromagnetic pulses, leaving them vulnerable and helpless in the void. It was an enemy unlike any they had encountered before, one that relied on power and control rather than cunning or adaptability. The Solaris would face a challenge unlike anything it had yet survived. But Alaron was resolute. There was one thing he had learned through this alliance: no force, no matter how overwhelming, was unbeatable if one had the right combination of strategy, adaptability, and sheer determination. Captain. Lena's voice pulled Alaron from his thoughts. She approached him on the bridge, her expression steady, though her eyes burned with the fire of impending battle. The Obsidian fleet is in range. It's time. Alaron turned from the view of the distant stars to face her, his mandibles clicking with determination. I know. This is it, isn't it? The final test for our alliance. Lena gave a quick nod. They think they've got the upper hand. They believe no one can stand against their technology. They've never encountered us before. Human unpredictability. Alaron mused, a hint of a smile crossing his features. They'll expect us to engage them head-on. They'll be prepared for that. But they won't be prepared for what we're about to do. Lena's grin was one of quiet confidence. I hope you're right. We've got one shot at this. We can't let them corner us. Alaron turned to the ship's tactical officer, a seasoned Ethelith who had learned quickly to adapt to the unorthodox methods Lena had introduced. Initiate Plan Gamma 7. Disrupt their sensors. Lead them into the asteroid field. Once we've got them where we want them, we'll hit them with everything we've got. The officer nodded, fingers flying across the controls, feeding commands into the ship's system. What about the EMP weapon? Lena asked, eyes narrowed in concern. We'll need to make sure they use theirs first. If we launch too early, we'll be defenseless. Alaron paused, his mind racing through the variables. We play this by instinct, by reaction. No rules. Lena's eyes sparkled with a mix of excitement and apprehension. Sounds like a plan. The Solaris moved into position, its crew working in perfect synchronization. Their target, the heart of the Obsidian Collective's fleet, a massive warship that was said to house the EMP weapon capable of shutting down an entire armada in seconds. The Solaris's cloaking systems engaged, and the ship became a ghost in the dark expanse of space, moving through the debris field, the dense asteroid clouds that littered the outer rim of the system. The Obsidian Collective's fleet, still unaware of their approach, spread out in a formation that covered a large swath of space. We're in position, the tactical officer reported. The enemy is oblivious. It's time. Alaron's chest tightened. This was it. The key to their success lay in leading the enemy into a false sense of security, luring them into the asteroid belt where their EMP weapon would be rendered useless by the dense material in the field. Deploy decoys, Alaron commanded. Let them think we're still here. Let them believe we're too disorganized to fight back. Lena stepped forward, her voice calm but laced with intensity. They'll come at us in full force. The second they fire that EMP, we need to be ready to move fast. The Solaris deployed a series of false signals and holographic decoys, making it seem as though there were multiple versions of the ship scattered across the asteroid field. It wasn't a perfect illusion, but it was enough to confuse the Obsidian fleet, which began to shift positions, preparing to strike. Alaron's eyes never left the screens. He could feel the pulse of the situation, the tension in the air, the knowledge that this could be the end or their greatest victory. Then, the first volley came. A massive blast of energy erupted from the Obsidian warship, followed by a ripple of electromagnetic interference that flooded the space around them. The Solaris shuddered as the first wave of the EMP weapon passed through its defenses, but it didn't cripple them. Not yet. They've fired the EMP, Lena confirmed. Now, we go. Move us toward the heart of their formation. Alaron's hand gripped the controls as the Solaris shifted, accelerating with a burst of speed, heading directly toward the Obsidian flagship. The second volley of EMPs came, but this time, they were too far from the Solaris to disable it fully. The ship's countermeasures kicked in, shielding it from the brunt of the attack. In the confusion of their first strike, the Obsidian fleet was unable to fully track the Solaris. The Ethelith ship wove through the asteroid field with an almost reckless grace, using the debris to shield them from the enemy's sensors. And then, at the perfect moment, they emerged from the cover of the asteroids, launching their own weapons with deadly precision. The first salvo hit the flagship with incredible force, shaking the enemy ship to its core. The pirates had underestimated the adaptability of the human Ethelith alliance. Lena's voice crackled over the comms. her tone a mix of satisfaction and focused fury. They didn't expect that, did they? Alaron's mandibles clicked in approval. We've got them on the defensive. Now, we finish this. The Solaris pressed forward, each move a calculated risk. The combined power of Ethelith weaponry and human ingenuity, each strike more unpredictable than the last, sent the Obsidian fleet into disarray. Ships that had once appeared invincible were now taking hits, their crew scrambling to regain control. But it wasn't just the Solaris that was proving a challenge. The human and Ethelith crews worked together seamlessly, coordinating maneuvers in ways the enemy couldn't follow. The once unfathomable concept of chaos had become their greatest asset. As the final battle raged on, the Solaris delivered the decisive blow. The Obsidian flagship, crippled and on the verge of collapse, exploded in a brilliant flash of light. Alaron stood in silence for a moment, watching the debris spread out across space. His mind buzzed with the intensity of the battle, the power of unpredictability that had carried them to victory. "It's over," Lena said, her voice softer now, but still full of that unshakable confidence. Alaron nodded, finally allowing himself to breathe. "Yes, but this victory is just one chapter in a much larger story." He turned to look at the crew. The Ethelith officers were no longer skeptical. They had embraced the chaos, adapted to it, and now they had proven its worth. Lena's methods, the human way, had proven to be a powerful tool in their arsenal. "This alliance," Alaron said quietly, "is more than just a partnership. It's the future." The crew, both human and Ethelith, exchanged nods of agreement. Together, they had shown the galaxy that strength came not just from power, but from the ability to change, to adapt, and to embrace the unpredictable. And as the Solaris sped off into the depths of space, Alaron knew one thing for certain: whatever the future held, they would face it together, unpredictably, boldly, and without fear.